harm reduction, and living amongst the wilderness.
And ready, set, go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Harm Reduction Report. We're on week 36 here. It's your pal Cal, and I'm sitting here with Mr. Alexander. You want to introduce yourself?
Hey there, everyone. Yep, this is Alexander here, tuning in.
How you doing?
Doing great.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here with us. I know it's kind of short notice, but definitely grateful to have you on the show once again. I think that makes this your third time or
Yeah,
fourth
third time on the
Fourth
show
time on?
here. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here. So what we got for you today, folks, is once again we have Will checking in from the wilderness out in Ely, and he has some insightful wisdom and sort of discusses how he's feeling out in the wilderness and how that ties into harm reduction and healing and health and well-being. And then he goes so far as to put SIgurd Olson's words to music, and it was beautifully done.
Very well done.
It was very well done. It sounded so good. His voice was like so dynamic, using different tricks in his vocal range, and the words of SIgurd Olson were so deep and meaningful and like poetic. So it was definitely a fun listen. Yeah. I almost want to play it twice. I almost want to like cut to the clip here. Here's Will singing, and then play it again at the end. But I guess we'll cross that bridge in a little bit here. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and clip Will in here, checking in from the wilderness, and then we'll just do some follow-up ideas. He talks a lot about health and wellness and the peace and tranquility associated with being out there in the wilderness, separated from society. And so I have an article that I'd like a journal article with some statistics and some empirical evidence that I think would be interesting to follow up with after hearing from Will. So let's turn it over to Will. Thanks again for tuning in, everybody. Here's Willard TeaBelly.
Hey everybody, it's Willard TeaBelly calling in from the wilderness. Thank you so much, Cal, for having my segment on this week. I am going to be sitting tonight by the campfire as the full moon rises over the pines on our little lake. And I know it's going to be a time to think. It'll be an opportunity to be alone and to experience solitude in the great silence of such a moment. Assuming we don't have some last-minute guests, that's always a possibility. In which case, we may do more talking than listening, but we will all see for sure the full moon rising over the campfire. And in any case, whether it's completely solitudinous or not, such a moment is an opportunity to listen and to absorb something. And it's in moments like this, being aware of moments like this, being out here for a few weeks, I've noticed that these moments can be very special and they can provide a lot of healing. No matter what a person's situation is, a lot of healing can come from being intentional about purposely absorbing such a simple, natural thing like that, just playing out before your eyes, just happening all on its own. The magnificent consequences and impacts that such a scene has on your life and on the state of what is all everywhere is quite remarkable, and you can feel it in a fun way, just with a little intention and at the right time seeing something and healing. And I thought, well, for my segment this week on the Harm Reduction Report, it'd be think about these moments and how can these moments impact individuals' healing processes in regards to anything, a mental disruption, a addiction, a mental disruption because someone you know died, because there's something going on in your own mind, or because the weight of the world is getting you down. whatever it may be, we can learn from these healing opportunities. One source of inspiration to write about this, to talk about this week right now also is, and this thinking about this opportunity to listen is actually, I think that's word for word a line from a book called The Singing Wilderness by SIgurd Olson. SIgurd Olson, who I've mentioned before on this last few weeks, is a nature writer who died in the 80s, I believe. He wrote about the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, and the Quetico in Canada. This area of preserved canoe wilderness area is really amazing. And I'm learning about it because he wrote about it a lot. But after he wrote The Singing Wilderness, his second book this guy Sigurd wrote was called Listening Point. And it describes an actual place on Burnside Lake, just west of Ely, Minnesota, that Sigurd found and called Listening Point. And he bought this land and he built a cabin on this point, and this is where he was going to do a lot of his writing. In truth, he actually didn't do any writing there. He wrote there like twice the whole time he had this cabin. He had a house in town and a little shack he called the writing shed near his house, where he actually did most of his writing. He wrote many books. But this Listening Point meant a lot to him, I guess, because right after his first The Singing Wilderness, he wrote this Listening Point. Describes why he called this point Listening Point. And it has to do with listening to the singing wilderness. And it was his point from which to hear the singing wilderness. And recently I took a trip to the Listening Point itself, just this week, and got to explore and see for myself. I just read The Singing Wilderness and Listening Point, and so now I'm going to go see Listening Point. And it was really interesting because it was not at all what I thought it would look like. Somehow, in reading and just feeling about all the descriptions of the point in the book, I imagined it being high up on a cliff. Or at least I always imagined seeing the scene from high up on a cliff. But the truth is, Listening Point is right on the water. It's a little peninsula sticking out into the lake. And the point is sea level, lake level. It's on the ground. But it feels really good. And actually, the cabin is higher up because it's a little bit inland. It's not right on the coast, on the shore. And that's something I knew because there's a whole chapter of his Listening Point book where he describes how he built the cabin. Well, actually, he didn't build it there. He found a cabin and had it moved to this spot. But one thing he and his wife decided was not to put the cabin right on the water, that it would be an eyesore sticking out, like that. What they wanted to see was complete wilderness, so they set the cabin back from the water. This was their own form of harm reduction. Possibly it's safer for the cabin to be away from the water, but also it preserves the integrity of the wilderness scene that they wished to listen to out on this point. So they set the cabin a ways back, and I got to see the cabin, and really interesting. It's right next to this massive glacial radical, which is a huge rock, a huge boulder, piece of former mountain that is now just sitting there. That was put right near this point by the glaciers, the same glaciers that cut out the lake and parts of the lake and the channels between all the lakes that make the Boundary Waters what it is, this amazing connected web of water flowing in such a unique, wonderful way, thanks to the last 4 glacial experiences we've had, glaciations. the most recent glaciation, as we know, when the glaciers came all the way down, they started receding just near about 12,000 years ago. And that's when a lot of these new lake channels were carved once more by this series of glaciers dragging big stones across the landscape as they retreated to the north. Anywho, Sigurd writes a lot about stuff like that, about these deep histories of the land itself. And from a harm reduction standpoint, well, it's just very educational. And it's good to think about these things. Once you're aware of what the land went through to become what it is, you really see it differently. And not just you see how fragile it is and you see its weaknesses that you now may be in a better position of protecting, that you're better aware of them. You also see its strengths in a much different light. And sometimes you identify strengths you didn't even see before without all this background. Without realizing that all the lakes were connected in this ancient, wild, natural way. It can change what they do for us and mean for us today, and what we can predict they may mean to people in the future. He's got one chapter in Listening Points, really cool, called Forest Pool, where he describes this really beautiful wilderness scene. I remember, I don't have the book in front of me right now, but I remember the description of a pool in a forest. Yeah, duh. But not super deep. He describes the game trails, the trails that the animals were making to and from this perfectly circular pool in the forest that spreads out and becomes shallow outside. It's just kind of a depression in the ground. It makes this pool. He described it as looking like a wheel, and the pool itself was the hub of the wheel, and the trails going to the drinking pool looked like the spokes on the wheel, and the hub was the pool. Really cool image. The perfectness of the pool to Sigurd, he would mean the uninfluenced by humanness of it. And the way he describes it is really beautiful and cool. And he goes through that whole history of how this pool formed, and it was because of how the glaciers were moving through the area, and why the trees are at the stage they're at, how long they've been growing, what they've been through, where the animals came from. Oh, it's so exciting. And then he describes people moving through, and actually a logging crew moving through and removing most of the biggest trees. And when the trees were gone, the vegetation changed, and this resulted in less water flow going to the little pool. And so the pool begins to dry up, and all the things there begin to either leave or die and change. And finally, the pool has become sort of just this stinking mosquito pit. And now that the trees have been removed, it's open, and one of the loggers returns a few years later and builds a house out of the remaining trees, and builds a farm here, and tills the land and plows the land and changes it into a flat farm field. But this mosquito pit, this persistent pit, won't dry up completely, and now it's just this stinking hole in the middle of his land. And finally, one day, after one of his horses drowns in the pit, he decides he's got to get rid of it. So he rides his other horse into town and buys some dynamite, and returns to blow up the pit. And he waits until it's summer and he can walk up to it, and he digs a hole for his dynamite and blows the pit away. And then Sig describes again how the land healed itself over and became a part of the man's field, and that was the end of the forest pool. That's how it ended. And Sigurd described seeing it at each stage of this process. And the lessons to be learned when a long view like that is taken is very interesting. He even has a whole chapter standing on this big glacial radical next to his cabin. He describes a falling leaf. There's a whole chapter called Falling Leaf. So first he sees this leaf at the top of the tree, and it was sort of early in the season before he would expect leaves to start changing and falling. But he sees the very toppest leaf on this one tree. The leaf has begun to change colors. And it falls right before his eyes, and he lands at his feet. So he picks it up, and just describes the really interesting scientific process of how it is that leaves actually fall from trees. That it's, in fact, growing cellulose dividing near the stem is what deliberately snips it, cuts it free from its holdfast of the tree. And he describes it just like such sincerity. You have to be into it with him. Like how beautiful he thinks the colors of this leaf are and how they change. You know, like we've all seen a leaf of which he describes, of the kind he describes, but or at least something similar to it. But he describes it so fascinatingly that you have to think, well, maybe it is kind of beautiful how this leaf has so many colors on it, and how it's now all the rest of the leaves that will be falling. So he took this as a signal, because he was so shocked that a tree would be changing so soon. But he realized that winter is coming, as they say, and he needed to be ready for that. And this is what the leaf was telling him. It was a herald, actually, into the new adventure that was to befall them sooner than Sig thought. From this very spot, he describes a lot of cross-country ski trips he takes across the ice at like 20 below zero. Ski trips over the snow. One chapter near the end is called The Spawning, which has a pretty intimidating, scary title. And this like dark, strange-looking illustration next to it to mark the beginning of the chapter. You can't quite tell what it is. Well, he describes going out there and out in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter, on negative 20 degrees, to see these fish, these strange fish. I wish I had the book in front of me. I'll tell you the name of the fish. Oh, the eel pout. The eel pout spawn. He watches these fish crawl out of the depths of these frozen lakes, and these nearly frozen lakes, the eel pout come out of the depths of the frozen lakes to the streams where the water is moving, and they roll and they spawn. Their reproduction is really wild. He describes it as this like insanely primeval feeling thing. He describes himself as being sort of tripped out by watching the experience. They shine lights on the streams, and they see these fish rolling around and writhing in the mud. And then they like latch onto each other in this really interesting way, and they roll around in the mud in these big groups in the middle of the night. And he describes himself like feeling really uneasy when they left, but by the time they returned to Listening Point, the sun had begun to rise, and the day began to feel like a normal, lovely morning, though extremely cold. And he started to feel better about this spawning, I guess. Well, I think it's hard to say. He's like describing how concerned he is, and at the very end of the chapter, it just is like him sort of trying to ignore the fact that he just saw that, and describing like a little squirrel running up and down in the sun rising, and can't tell if he's coming to peace and making peace with this primordial thing he just experienced and incorporating it into his vision of a peaceful morning, or if he's trying to cover up his concern with the beauty of this peaceful morning. It's hard to say. But at listening point is a point to consider all this. And why is any of this relevant to us on the harm reduction report? Again, I've got to make the case for wilderness. Well, there's many metaphors to be made. I sat for a while at listening point trying to absorb some things. And, well, I realized some of these stories that Sig told about listening point, about the falling leaf, about the spawning, about the moon magic, and the moving of his cabin and the fate of that forest pool. I ended up personifying some of these inanimate objects and natural creatures and concepts and making metaphors with my own life in regard specifically to people I've known who've suffered or died from addiction to drugs or from just simply a misuse of substances or tragic consequences of misinformation and a lack of time to think, a lack of time to heal. Without the healing resources available, with no listening point from which to think, it's no wonder so many of us fall victim to such things as drunk driving accidents or substance overdose. None of it really must happen. If we decide we have the time to make the compassion happen, we can reduce it. These are some things I was thinking about at listening point. And one thing I did while I was there was I recorded some music. So SIgurd Olson, the first 2 pages of his Singing Wilderness book, I memorized them pretty much word for word and set them to music. And I recorded it there, and I'm going to record another version of it here now. And that'll end my segment. I just wanted to sort of explain Sigurd's place, this listening point, to give you an idea of how maybe we should all find a listening point. I think that's the case that Sigurd's making. You know, he doesn't describe it as the perfect listening point. It happened to fit the bill of something he was looking for when he was looking to find a place to build his cabin. It felt right to him. But it's not the one and only listening point. We each need a listening point. And so I'm encouraging myself now to find my own and make sure I have my own, and to see about telling people that they may find benefit in finding one for themselves too. So I'm going to sing this little song here now that is Sigurd's words, and then I'll leave you to the sandbagging is that be. So thanks a lot, everybody. The singing wilderness has to do with the calling of loons, of northern lights and the great silences of lands lying northwest of Lake Superior. It is concerned with the simple joys, the timelessness and perspective found in a way of life that is close to the past. I've heard the singing in many places, but I seem to hear it here best in a lake wilderness land of Aketico Superior, where travel is still by pack and canoe over the ancient trails of the indigenous and the voyagers too. I have heard it on misty migration nights when the dark has been alive with the high calling of birds, and in rapids when the air is full of their rushing thunder. I have caught it at dawn when the mists are moving on out of the bays, and on cold winter nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch, but the music may even be heard in the soft gutter of an open fire, or the beat of rain on a tent, and sometimes not until long afterward when, like an echo out of the past, you know it was there in some quiet place when you were doing something simple in the out-of-door space. Well, we have discovered we're not alone in our listening, that almost everyone's a-listening for something, that the search for places where the music may be heard goes on everywhere. It's a part of our hunger which we all were aware when we were younger, more connected with lakes and rivers and mountains and streams and meadows and forests than we seem to be today. Because of our almost forgotten past, there is a restlessness within us, an impatience with things the way they are, which modern life and the comforts and distractions just does not seem to satisfy. We sense intuitively that there must be something more. Search for panaceas we hope will bring us a sense of reality. Fill our days and nights with such activity and our minds with such busyness, there's little time to think. When the pace stops, we are often lost. Then we plunge once more into the maelstrom, hoping to move fast enough and fill the void within us, but we may not know what it is we are listening for. But we hunt as instinctively for opportunity to listen as sick animals looking for healing herbs. Even the search is rewarding, for somehow in the process we tap the wells of experience that give us a feeling of being a part of an existence in which life was simple and satisfaction's real. Uncounted centuries of the primitive have left their mark upon us, and civilization has not changed the emotional needs that have been ours since before the dawn of history. There be the reason for the hunger and the listening, and the constant search. Should we actually glimpse the ancient glory, or dare to hear the singing wilderness? Cities and their confusion become places of quiet, speed and turmoil reduced to the pace of the seasons, and tensions replaced with peace. Well, bring me into the wilderness, so my friends and I might hear the singing like Sig did, and give us the power and the hours of life to make a move, to communicate, to give it a try. Maybe do a little moon magic groove, maybe make a little music of our own too, so we might carry on the long tradition of loving, living, being, isn't, yes, the singing wilderness. Thanks a lot, everybody. Sandbag on.
All right, so that was Willard TeaBelly, and he put his own chord progression, his own music, and his own voice to the words of SIgurd Olson.
Wow, that was very well done.
What a treat.
Yeah,
What a treat that was.
That was really great. I've known Will for quite some time, and I've heard him sing and play some guitar and stuff like that, but I feel like he's gone leaps and bounds
Yeah.
in hearing that. What a surprise. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was really, really cool.
He's outdone himself here. I've heard him sing and play before, and this one was really good. He did a great job. That was awesome.
Yeah. So, what does it mean to really introduce the wilderness to harm reduction? Right. I think he made these metaphors, and I mean, I think it's an interesting topic. Going out into nature, into the wilderness, and how it relates to human health. what are we actually finding here? I'm wondering.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's a bit of a loaded question, but there is definitely a case to be made. Um, and I mean, yeah, I have an article pulled up here from 2005, and there were tons of recent ones and tons of old ones. And you see, I mean, you see that hospitals are implementing this sort of plants and foliage, and not the fake ones anymore. They're trying to put in real plants and rehabilitation centers and treatment centers and stuff like that. Um, they note a lot of success when they're out there with a big lakefront view and the trees and the wilderness and the nature surrounding them. And going to a place like that is considered luxurious,
Yeah.
and it costs extra. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is because there is such a huge health benefit to being out in the wilderness. So, Will did talk a lot about that. But here in this article, I just opened up Google Scholar, and the article is titled "Healthy Nature, Healthy People. Contact with nature as an upstream health promotion intervention for populations." And essentially, what this is saying is that things like city parks and public parks and lots of plants and things like that, basically having nature in the city, can promote the health and well-being. So here is a quote. It says, "People with access to nearby natural settings have been found to be healthier overall than other individuals. The longer-term indirect impact of nearby nature also include increased levels of satisfaction with one's home, one's job, and with life in general." So when Will gets really abstract when he's checking in from the nature there.
Yeah.
And I think it gets so abstract that it's hard to figure out how to tie it into harm reduction. But then when you follow it up with something, this concrete journal article here, I think that really brings it home, because it's saying by having nature around, the opportunity for parks and things like that, people can improve their quality of life, their life satisfaction.
Right.
And addiction stems in large part, in many cases, from a feeling of not having satisfaction with life.
Yeah.
So there you go. There's swinging it right into harm reduction there.
Yeah, no, that's a good. I definitely can see that in a lot of ways here, even in regards to my own personal life.
Yeah.
I live actually right in the heart of a downtown city in Grand Forks, and we have some parks around. We have the river, the Red River, that flows north here, and the Greenway, where we can always go out and ride some bikes and everything. And I'm blessed to have this here, basically at my disposal and sort of in my backyard here.
Yeah.
Anytime I can just go down to the river and do some catfishing or something, and looking at that and seeing the city quite adjacent to it, man. If I just spend too much time in the city here, I just get sick. It's like I get sick to my stomach. I just don't feel free. I feel too confined. And it just doesn't feel like I'm very abundant just living in the city. I've lived in larger cities, Las Vegas. I spent some time out there for a little bit, and it was just a constant bombardment
Of city
life. Exactly, yeah. And we know that large cities have drug issues.
Mm-hmm.
They really do.
The more urban you get,
yeah,
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's just something that I've seen. Like police, and those. I mean, I don't really go to like small town, Minnesotan communities and see drug rehab centers out in the middle of the wilderness too much, too often. They're usually like that sort of stuff, like the juvenile courts, all of that are obviously in cities for a reason because it's centralized and localized. But they have major drug issues. There's more people, but there's major drug issues in cities, and I think that these parks and everything could be in a way to increase happiness
Yeah.
amongst people who are looking for happiness.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, like, in the future, I expect that more and more, this is valid science. So I
Yeah.
expect that as communities open up more and more to the idea of rehabilitating or assisting people that have addiction issues, I imagine that they'll be more receptive to the ideas of, like, incorporating parks and
Right.
nature and stuff like that.
Right.
Is that river part of the reason? Is that part of what, like, helped you pick this place? I remember when I first met you,
Okay.
you seemed like very, very in touch with the earth.
Oh, yeah.
Almost to a bizarre degree to me when
Yeah.
I had first met you. And now, I've come to understand it much, much more. And even, also because of you, I've been like, oh, now I do need to get more in touch with nature and value the river in my backyard here and the
Yeah.
parks. And then there's this research here in front of us. It's like, yeah, we got to enjoy parks and nature and trees.
Well, my background, I mean, yeah, that's actually a good yes and no. When I first moved to Grand Forks and picked this apartment here in downtown, having it be so close to the Greenway was certainly a perk. But in relation to my own background, I lived actually in Las Vegas for a while when I was a kid, and I lived actually in downtown Las Vegas. So I was in the middle of these cities and these urbanized areas, and then I had the chance to move up to Oregon, and that was a complete. I mean, with what we're talking about right now, cityscape versus natural scape, and the nature of the earth. I mean, I remember right before I had moved up to Oregon, I had major health issues, actually. I was a little overweight, and I think I had a little bit of depression, and then I moved out to Oregon, and I had, I mean, I had like a complete turnaround there on it, and I started to lose weight. I started to become a more happy person, and I had all these resources. I mean, I was hiking, I was riding
So
my
the nature.
bicycle. Yeah, it felt like really comforting. When you're underneath trees too, when you go outside, like you're in the middle of a city, right? You go outside, what's around you? City buildings,
Brick, yeah.
brick, and that sort
Pollution,
of thing.
smell.
Yeah, exactly.
Depending on the size of the city, the smell of pollution. Even.
Right, and you know what? When you go out to in Oregon, and you go for a walk, there's so many trees. It's just such a difference in having that the trees surround you rather than the buildings surrounding you, and it's just it's so alive, and we are very interconnected with the earth here, and
I totally
yeah.
I take it for granted. I totally do. I remember when Willard TeaBelly, first time he came to my apartment, he stood on our back patio and he was like overlooking the bridge and
Yeah.
the river and stuff. And he said, wow, this is awesome. You guys must stand out here all the time. And I was thinking to myself, and like almost guiltily, like, no, not really. I really don't. I sit inside with my windows shut. And it's like that's missing the point, I mean, of course, everybody reserves the right to have their quiet solitude.
Yeah, and their privacy and stuff too.
And stay inside, relax, and maybe there's a different kind of healing in that.
Yeah.
But also, I can feel it that I'm taking it for granted. I can feel it that I'm not using the wilderness right in my backyard to its fullest potential.
Right.
Like just taking a brief walk down there. I mean, we ought to do that after this, and
oh yeah.
and get in touch with the nature out there.
Yeah, it's I think it's easy for a lot of people actually to overlook like the natural scenes that are gifted here. I mean, Grand Forks is a a city that has actually quite a bit in its surrounding area. Turtle River State Park. There's also Red River State Park in Minnesota. I mean, just going out even into Minnesota too, and staying on the Red River here. There's a lot of scenery. Maybe not as much as Oregon, but there is a lot, and
Yeah.
it is really healthy to go out there and spend your time there. Maybe going on a hike with a bicycle or something, or whatever else. And that time that you're doing that I mean that time when you're out at Turtle River with a bicycle, going on these trail rides, is time that you're not using drugs.
Hmm.
Is time that you have improving yourself rather than not, and
Improving wellness, yeah,
improving
life wellness.
and that's where we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing for me in seeing that, for harm reduction and everything, is a simple fact that not a lot of drugs go hand in hand with fitness.
Hmm.
But fitness goes very well hand in hand with nature. So there's a clear thing with that. I know that there's certainly a lot of athletes that use marijuana or drugs and stuff like that, but I don't think majority of them do. And even if they do, um, there's probably clear reasons as to why. Because I mean, if they're professional athletes and they know their bodies, medically speaking, say marijuana, maybe there's a reason why.
Oh,
For
maybe they're using like for pain relief or
maybe,
whatever.
yeah, exactly, yeah,
something
maybe
like
for
that.
pain relief, maybe for maybe just getting to sleep at night. Um,
Or maybe depending on what research shows,
right.
perhaps it isn't as bad as the propaganda once suggested,
Yeah.
or maybe it is. That's kind of a risky statement to make. You don't want to like encourage use at all.
No.
That's not the point of this.
No. No. No.
But I want to touch on what you said about a lot of times, and also what I said about a lot of times shutting ourselves in. I think life gets so busy, and we're working 6 days a week, 7 days a week, 8-hour days, 12-hour days, or whatever. And then the day you have off, you have this to-do list that you've been putting off for months. And
Oh yeah.
I think life gets so busy that it's easy to say, it's my day off. I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything at all. And I think that's okay too. I think that's okay. I find value in doing that sometimes.
Oh yeah.
But I ought to open the window at least and take a peek out into the river,
Oh yeah, the fresh
or take
air.
fresh
I mean,
air.
that's
The
a, that's
15.
a huge thing.
Absolutely, that'll increase my wellness. I wanna read this here, just the next paragraph of this journal article I pulled up. It says, when parks were first designed in the 19th century, city officials had a strong belief in the possible health advantages that would result from open space. It was hoped that parks would reduce disease, crime, and social unrest, as well as providing green lungs for the city and areas for recreation. These assumptions were used as justification for providing parks and other natural areas in cities, and for preserving wilderness areas outside of cities for public use.
Right.
Contact with nature in an urban environment may be experienced via various means, including viewing natural scenes, being in natural settings, encountering plants and animals, participating in recreational activities, so on and so forth, nature-based therapy programs. Although the study upon which the paper is based included an examination of the human health benefits of observing plants and animals, the review that I have here pulled in front of me focuses on everyday interactions with nature in a park setting by urban populations. Just as like as broad as including like viewing a natural scene, being in a natural environment. So basically what I gather from that right there is that you don't need to go all the way out of your way to the state park, or you don't got to put yourself in the middle of
Oh
the
yeah.
woods, totally isolated. It's not like that. I mean, that probably carries its own set of benefits.
Yeah.
Like, Will is out there totally separated from society in huge part, and that has its own set of benefits. But what they're saying here is simply looking at a plant.
Yeah.
It has shown positive health outcomes. Simply looking at a tree, opening the window on your day off when you're shut in your apartment, that's harm reduction in the sense that it's going to increase life satisfaction. And I think we got to learn to appreciate the small things. I get so caught up.
I was just I had actually was aware of the small things in this entire episode here, because we're looking at the small things, but they're also quite huge. When we take every variable, such as our physical landscape, into consideration here, and we see that that it has an effect on us. I mean, it seems like it is sort of a small thing, but these little things add up.
Right. It seems like it wouldn't be that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like maybe drinking more water, right? Maybe, I don't know, meditating for 5 minutes only a day or something, or just any of these small little things that can be changed. Going out for a walk in the nature at least a couple times a week. That sort of thing. All these little things that we can do to really improve our happiness, and to surely stem us away from drugs.
Yeah, problematic.
Problematic
drug use,
addictions and that sort of thing.
When it comes to drugs, I want to be clear, like, for a second, real quick. Like, drugs include even alcohol, and I'm not against alcohol consumption. Alcohol consumption can be healthy. It can be balanced. It can improve well-being. It can be used appropriately. But yeah, we're talking about specifically like problematic drug use. So
yeah, exactly. Addictions in particular here,
Yeah. Or even like binge drinking, that can be problematic without being necessarily an actual addiction. I mean, it can still be problematic.
Yeah,
so
that's interesting.
That's why I like the term problematic drug use.
Right.
Because I feel like it's a little more specific. Okay, sweet. Yeah. I wanted to jump again right back into this Healthy Nature, Healthy People article that I found on Google Scholar. These are some of the assertions that they found evidence for in this paper here. And this is like a summary. It has like an assertion, basically a hypothesis, and then it has several different articles listed after in which they found supporting details for that assertion.
Gotcha.
So here, these are impressive and powerful. It says, number one, there are some known beneficial physiological effects that occur when humans encounter, observe, or otherwise positively interact with animals, plants, landscapes, or wilderness. So that's the assertion. Then you can see it has three check marks for, like, yes, there's solid evidence, and then it has this list of different studies here that supported that.
Right.
Here's number two. Natural environments foster recovery from mental fatigue and are restorative. So today, I woke up entirely mentally fatigued and went through my day very mentally fatigued and still am mentally fatigued. Now being put on the spot, it's here doing this episode, I'm kind of jumping into it and my mind is moving again. But they found sufficient evidence for that statement. Natural environments help recover from mental fatigue. Number three, there are established methods of nature-based therapy, including wilderness, horticultural, and animal-assisted therapy, among others, that have success healing patients who previously had not responded to treatment. Okay, wow. So I didn't even read that one. That's really impressive. That reminds me of the ketamine treatment for people that have depression. Like, have you ever heard of that? The ketamine treatment?
Never have heard of it. No.
They're like, so if someone has depression, they've tried different meds and different therapies and stuff, and it's not working. They still have depression and it's problematic for them. They can try this ketamine treatment as a last resort, which tends to work very well for people. And that's what they're saying right here. This wilderness can do.
Yeah.
So I wonder, something tells me that this wilderness treatment is not part of the criteria before which you go to ketamine treatment. That was kind of confusing how I worded that, but basically what I'm trying to say is that I bet you that they don't try wilderness treatment very often for mental illness, but here it's saying we should.
Yeah. Being out, even, when you're out in nature and your feet and your toes are in the earth,
you can feel it.
You can feel, yeah. I mean, there's the term grounding.
Yeah.
Is what is pretty popular, and there's certain energies that we can come in contact with when we just set our feet, in water, in the sand, on grass, and just walk around for a little bit and just feel it all out. It just reconnects us and grounds us, almost as if there's a ground and electrical system as well, and it really just helps us balance ourselves out. So we do have electrical systems within us.
We're energy. We're like mechanical.
Right.
We're mechanics. We're a machine that is directing energy, and so is the earth, and so is our environment.
Yeah, exactly.
And interacting with the environment in a certain way will direct the energy through you in a certain way. It sounds real hippie.
I know,
and real like all woo science and stuff, but it doesn't matter.
Right.
It says it right here as well,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I mean, as hippie as it sounds or whatever, not to be derogatory, but however it sounds, it has support. In science, and within. Hopefully, it'll spread more and more so throughout the medical community, and because I never heard much about it. Like in my days of treatment, I never heard much about the importance of going into nature. In fact, it was not talked about much at all. They of course recommended exercise.
Yeah, of course.
But
actually, that's a good. Well, I have a friend who is an occupational therapist, and she's working with someone who has an issue with opening up their shoulders and their arms, and they have. They're really closed in, and I don't know if they had gotten through like an accident or exactly what it was, but for their therapy, she has set up a fishing experiment, not really an experiment, but like a therapy session, where he can have a fishing pole, and he will throw out a fishing pole, and that acts as a way of therapy and using these muscles and that sort of thing.
Interesting.
And he loves fishing, and that's why they had gone through that occupational therapy session.
So it brings him like to his happy place.
Yes, exactly.
Basically.
Yeah, it brings someone to their happy place out in nature. He's got physical, difficulties using his upper body strength and everything, but he's able to utilize that in that setting, and you just really can't. You can't compare with that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Throughout my psychology undergraduate career, I've heard a little bit of this. I mean, I've always known in the back of my mind, but I've never in the 4 years at UND has anyone shown me this with this huge support. I mean, that's a very impressive statement that it says here. This animal-assisted therapy or wilderness therapy has success in healing patients who previously had not responded to treatment. That's like a huge statement. That's so impressive.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm definitely going to have to keep in the back of my mind, going forward here with the Face It Together addiction management coaching and stuff like that. And also in my own life.
Yeah.
In improving my own wellness.
I like this one here. It says people have a more positive outlook on life and higher life satisfaction when in proximity to nature.
Yeah.
And it says particularly in urban areas.
So the people that are in those very urban settings, taking them out, getting that wilderness exposure.
Yeah, their outlook, and that's such a huge thing for people who are addicted, because the outlook and the attitude and everything that so many people have when they are addictive, they just feel that they can't get out of this rut, and their outlook is so diminished, and that's like half the battle right there.
Mm-hmm.
If you can believe that you don't have to live this one particular way, addicted to whatever it is, and you're just stuck in that circle, in that pit, going out into nature is certainly going to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So moral of the story, everybody, I guess, is this week, let's get out into nature and use nature as our harm reduction this week. We've already been talking for the rest of the time. Do you believe it?
Yeah, I know. We're here.
It went quickly. So, thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Remember, the views and opinions expressed in this week's episode of the Harm Reduction Report don't necessarily represent any views and opinions of anybody else associated with the radio station. Just the views and opinions of Alexander and I. So once again, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Have a good week.
Thank you.
And real quick, I wanted to do a shout out to Face It Together and mention that anybody out there who is currently suffering with addiction or who has a loved one that is suffering with addiction, feel free to once again reach out to Face It Together Fargo Moorhead. We now have a satellite office open here in Grand Forks. As of right now, it's only on Thursdays, but we are striving to make that a more consistent option throughout the week and the weekends. Anyone suffering from an addiction or has a loved one suffering from an addiction, you can reach out to Face It Together at www.faceitfargomoorhead.org. You can reach an addiction management coach by phone at 701-566-5631. I'll say it once again. That is 701-566-5631. And I will soon have an email that I can start mentioning on the radio out in public for all kinds of questions and feedback and different things like that, whatever kinds of thoughts you guys want to share. So thanks. Have a good day, guys.